Hello, I'm Odin, and today I'm going to make another requested Star Wars prop. It's Bo-Katan's helmet as seen in The Mandalorian. I'm making another type of Mandalorian helmet. I can modify my Mandalorian heavy gunner helmet that I made before in order to get the basic pattern. I've got enough pre-existing patterns. Modifying what I have is an easy way to start. I measured a different head cast that I have and scaled this pattern to fit it. The pattern is printed out at 94% size. That'll make a helmet closer to Bo-Katan's size. And on a large helmet that'll fit me. I copied all the dome pattern pieces onto some 6mm HD foam. I normally cut the dome for my helmets from 10mm foam, but I wanted this one to be thinner so there'll be more room inside. I used my planishing stake and heat gun to curve all the dome pieces. Now, forming the flat foam into a compound curve before you try to glue it into a dome is a lot easier, and has a lot less stress on the glue seams. Now, the glue that I'm using is contact cement. You apply it to both halves of the material that you're working with, and give it a few minutes to dry, and then it'll get sticky, or you can help it dry with a hairdryer. Then you can stick the parts together. It still kind of fits. Now, I need to work on the back, because the back is a good place to start. And I realize I can look at the reference photo that I got over here, where I can measure out how tall the dome is versus how tall the back of the head is. And that becomes a ratio that I can make here in the real world. Easy. Now, I'm still using the original heavy gunner pattern for the back of the head, but I made some modifications and added some length to the helmet. There we go. So that's that piece. Right. But this is, okay. I even started cutting a hole for the vent that's on the back of the helmet. The vent has 6 or so louvers or panels that cover it, and each one of them has a little notch. I transfer my paper version onto some cardstock. It's going to be easier to work with cardstock to trace it out 6 more times onto foam. There we go. Alrighty. There. So that's the vent for the back. Then I've got my plug, and the two still line up. Pretty much, not really. Alright. I trim about 1 millimeter off of each side, and now the pattern's good to go. The last piece for the vent is the frame that's going to go around it all when it's in place. I made one from cardstock, and I was getting ready to start cutting foam when I noticed something was off. This looks way too big. That's an issue that I've got. I went, 63, this is way too big. This is way too big. So I'm gonna need to do is cut it all over again. Yay! And so I cut another one, and this one's a little shorter. But all the vent parts, they're still okay. I can still use all of them. I also start to plan out the big raised panel that goes around the back of her head. So I think that's all the detail that go on the back of the head. So I can probably make the back of the head now, and then I can kind of move on to the front. I traced the pattern onto some 6mm foam, and I'm using a pencil to do it because I can see it on the light gray foam, and the pencil lead is not going to bleed through the paint like some permanent inks will. I make sure the back of the head is wrapping around like I want it to. And then I cut all the vent pieces from 2mm HD foam. I had a small strip behind each vent piece because I thought it would help with the stacking that I'm going to need to do next. The pieces end up being on an angle when they're stacked, which is the look that I want to get. So I've got my 6 vent panels. Each panel is 2 pieces because on the back side there's an extra centimeter wide strip. And I've got glue on the notch side on the bottom and on the unnotched side on the top. This is going to be my guide. What I want to do is set this up against the edge. So I got it square on the edge here and the edge here, and that's 12 millimeters. So I'll end up with 12 exposed millimeters. Then I'm going to take the next one and put it right up against the cardboard and stick it in place. And then do that again. And this is cut extra long just so I have something to hold on to. right? You can kind of see that. If it was just the little tiny piece at the end, this would be a little more difficult to do. As it is, it's kind of hard to get this last one lined up. There are parts of the vent that end up being 3 layers thick, which is perfect because that's 6 millimeters. All right, smarty pants. How are you going to glue this in place? Super glue. A little super glue along the edges. This part would be really difficult to glue with contact cement. But I can use contact cement to attach the frame that fits around the vent. I just need to be really careful to not warp it. I apply 2 coats of contact cement to attach the back panel to the dome. I had also marked out the center point of the back panel so I can match it with the center on the seam of the dome. Now I need to make the face panel next, so I cut out the reduced face from my pattern, and at this point I mostly just need the top curve and the angles at the sides. To get the curve for the chin, I'm going to use a hip curve ruler. It's a pattern making ruler and it's marked on both sides so I can keep the curve consistent on both sides of the chin. And the pattern is too big, of course. I'm not sure why, but I can fix it. I copy it onto a new piece of paper and I fold it down the center. Then I can equally trim both sides at the same time. And I know how much to trim because I measured the size of the ruler that I've made from 6mm HD foam. I want to cut the part from 6mm foam so I know that this will be the right measurement. I trace and cut a faceplate from some 6mm foam. I need to put the visor in. It's not a typical T visor. She's got a Y visor, a lot like the Armorer does. And a big concern I have is making sure I get the pitch of her eyes right. I don't want her to be too crazy angry, but I don't want her to be kind of like, whatever. So I need to get that to be right. I draw out the visor and I adjust it 3 times for length and different angles. I'll adjust it at least once more after tracing it onto the foam. It's one of the last things I'm going to cut out, so I've got time to make sure that it's right. I draw out the pattern on the cheek curves. I only have to do one side because I can flip the pattern over to keep it symmetrical for the other side. I trace it onto both sides of the face, and I'm going to glue the panel into the helmet before I cut into it, because I want the curve of the face to be set before I make any cuts, and I want to see my lines in relation to the finished helmet. I'm okay with that. I got a good shallow slope. It's not huge. It'll look bigger when the ears get put on, but I'm okay with that. Oh, good, it doesn't fit. So I go ahead and cut out the cheeks. I had also adjusted them a little, so I'm cutting on my attached part, but it's got a double traced line. So I need to be really careful which of the set of lines I'm following. It's kind of amazing the curve is still there. I so expected this to flatten out in a really bad way. All right. I fold a piece of cardstock to be the hollow of the cheek, and then I hold it in place, and I try to trace the edges of the cheek holes onto the back of the cardstock. Now this really actually does work, but it takes a few attempts to get the corners into the right place. I trace the part I cut out to make a pattern, so I can cut out the other side the same way. I'm also cutting with a sharp blade, and I'm slightly pulling the blade out of the foam as I cut along the line. I get cleaner edges this way. If I had used a sawing motion, you would see a saw pattern in the edges of the foam. Okay, good. I've still got them attached to the bottom. Good. All right, how badly different are these guys? These are, oh, they're very, very, very close. They're very, very, very close. Good. Okay. So I'm using 4mm foam to fill the cheeks because since it's a little thinner, it seemed like it'd be easier to use. One problem is Blick Arts doesn't carry 4mm HD foam. Feel free to email them and ask them why not. Maybe they'll start carrying it. But if you wanted to use a thin stock like I am, try craft foam, any other craft foam or any other brand of thinner foam. 6mm might work as well. I just figured if I use the 4mm, it's going to be a little easier. I trace a right and a left side, and then I cut them out with a 45-degree cut on the lines. Then I cut most of the way through the panels, but not all the way. That way they can easily fold, and I can glue them in place. The 45-degree cut lets me get the edge right up to the corner of the face and not have any big foam seam lines. I glue in a couple of small wedges of foam just inside the cut cheeks. I hope this prevents them from tearing in the future, and it might strengthen the chin a little too. All right. I guess I need to do the ears. In order to start working on the ear pieces, I stepped away from the project and figured out my plans on the computer. Since I knew what my distance was from the bottom of the helmet to the seam up here, it was pretty easy to figure out what everything else needed to be. And I've got a bit here I've already cut out. So the gray line is the seam at the top of the dome, and it matches up with the bottom. This is the size I'm going to want it to be. To make it a little bit easier to cut the parts out of foam, I separated the things out into layers. So let's make some ears. The main piece will be 2 layers. The base part will be 6mm foam. And then I make a second layer of 4mm foam with the decorative slot cut out of it. When I glue them together, I try to keep the bottom layer flat so the parts won't have a potato chip warp to them. After the layers are glued, I round the tops off, and I add a strip of 6mm foam along the bottom with one side cut at 45 degrees. I trim the strip to fit it after it's attached. So I got the basic shapes cut out. The sides need to be beveled, so I'm going to tilt the table on my bandsaw and just cut those down really quick. Oh, but of course there's this extra bit here, so I can't quite lay them down flat in the bandsaw. I'm going to need to add a piece so it all sits flat. A piece of scrap will be fine, any piece of scrap. That'll hold it up right. Well, it should still cut. I did a couple of different angled cuts in the bandsaw. The first one was too steep, but the second one was good. Yep, 20. All right. So I got 2 different cuts here I did diagonally on the bandsaw. The first cut was at a 30-degree angle, and that's cutting off way too much material. So I did a second cut at 20 degrees. This is going to be the right size, but that means I need to make another earpiece to replace this one. All right. So I messed up one and remade 2 that have 20-degree cut all the way around the sides, which this is what I want. This piece is now a tester for getting this angle in, but that's in a minute. These earpieces, this is it. This is all you need if you want to do Ahsoka Reeves. It's actually the same helmet, and then the earpieces are a little bit simpler. It's just that, and that's her helmet. She needs her rangefinder, of course, but that's it. So this is almost a 2-for-1 pattern. You just stop a little early and you're good for Ahsoka. Alrighty, back to Catan. Let's see. The bottom needs to be cut at a 45-degree angle to get the correct shape. I cut out my templates for the detail parts, and each part is a different thickness of foam, 4mm, 2mm, and 6mm for the top piece. I cut out the center of my top paddle template so I can trace the outline onto the foam. Now I'm going to need it to grind an angle onto the piece. Okay, I'm going to need 2 mil. I need to cut a centimeter, right? This is a centimeter thick because it's 4 and 6, and 4 and 6 is still 10, right? It's still 10. I cut out a strip of 2mm foam and glue it around the bottom edge of the top panels. That's enough to support the thin edge, as I use a grinding stone to make a slope that goes from the pencil line down to the corner of the panel, all the way around the top of the panel. I made pencil marks to guide me as I glue the top panel onto the earpiece. Then I glued down the 4mm C-shaped panel and the 2mm insert. A little super glue will hold a piece of 10mm foam. This has a 20-degree cut to match the side of the ear. And then I can trim off the excess from the side after it's glued on. And a little super glue will keep the panel together along the top edge. Am I the only one that sees these as a pair of R2 unit legs? I mean, these are the shapes that need to go on the side of her helmet, but overall, it seems like you just need another little piece here, and that's the leg to an R2 unit. Yeah. I glue the ears on so they just barely cover the side seam. The front edge is just on the side seam. The ear is mostly on the back plate. There's that panel that wraps around the back of the helmet, so I use my 4mm ruler again to get the right length. And then I make a new pattern using the back of the head template as a guide. I adjusted the length to match my measurement from the 4mm ruler. I cut out the panel and finessed the edges to fit around the ear panel details. Now, I ended up with a few little gaps, but it's acceptable to me. I outlined the placement with pencil before I glued the part on. The outline helps me to get the piece in the right place the first time. The top edge needs some smoothing to fit the curve of the head. There's a gap between the vent and the new panel, so I'll fill it with a strip of 2mm foam. And there are two more angled detail panels that sit just behind the ears on top of that band. I cut more 2mm foam pieces for these. I need one more little piece. Just one. I use my hole drill to make a small disc of 2mm foam, and that gets super glued right on top of the right ear. And that only goes on the right side because that's the side that has the rangefinder. Left side is blank. I use a bullet-shaped grinding bit to remove the glue and smooth out the seams on the top of the helmet, around the front and the back, and I smooth out the seams on the cheeks. To fill in those rough seams and make a smooth dome, I use Alex Fast Dry Flexible Spackle. It sticks well to the roughed up foam, and when it dries, I can sand it smooth. And it'll take a couple hours to dry, but it's still faster than most other filler putty. So the last piece I need to make is the rangefinder. And one of the fun things with Mandalorian helmets is that the rangefinders all look a little bit different. I'm sure there's a consistent theme within a particular make or model of helmet, but since we're all seeing different personalities, each one has their own rangefinder. Bo-Katan is no different. I'm seeing it that is mostly flat. It isn't all the angled and extra cuts that the Clone Trooper helmets have. This is a much more refined and sleek rangefinder. I'm going to assemble the rangefinder upside down. The topmost piece I made 6mm thick. And then I glue on a piece of 2mm that'll be under it. This 2mm strip is skinnier, so it'll make a panel line on the side. Then I glue on the 4mm bottom panel. Now I'm doing my best to keep these parts flat as I glue them all together. The underside has a 10mm thick piece that's kind of the base, and it's got an angle on the inside edge. And there's a little square frame that goes on the bottom as well. I use the bandsaw to trim the sides off the 10mm part, and again to add the angle onto the back. One more small little angle along the front edge, and then I can glue a strip onto the top to complete the rangefinder. For the pole that it sits on, I have a piece of square stock brass tube. I cut into the foam where the pole had made its mark, so I can push the brass into the foam and super glue it in place. All right, and that's a rangefinder. It's been a few hours, and I can sand the spackle smooth on the helmet. It can still crack, so I need to be careful, but after it's sealed in place with a coat of white Plasti Dip spray, the spackle isn't going to go anywhere. I use different grinding bits to add battle scars onto the helmet. Mandalorians are famous for their dented helmets. Then I spray it with Plasti Dip spray, and after the spray dries, I cut out the visor hole. I had lightly scored the lines before I painted it so they would still be easy to see. And I cut them on a slight angle. See, Bo-Katan's helmet shouldn't look like it's 6mm thick on the face. I used some paper to make a pattern for the visor. I'll actually cut my visor out after everything is painted. First, I cover the entire helmet in a dark blue base color. And then I add some darker blue colors to the cheek. It takes a few coats of white to get the owl face started, but then I can add in the gray eye details. It's kind of a trick to make sure that these are symmetrical on both sides. Then I can add in the black lines that go around the top. The ears are painted with dark silvers with some bright silver highlights, and the back vent is silver. The band on the back of the head is a darker blue. And then I'm going to sponge paint a little blue back over the owl face to kind of make it look like it's chip paint. Bo-Katan's helmet has seen some wear. It's got blaster marks, there's paint chips, there's dents, scratches, and lots of silver dry brushing on the edges. And then I'll paint the rangefinder black with a little dry brushing for color. I use my paper pattern to cut out the visor from a grinding shield. Now this is thin polycarbonate plastic and it can be cut out with scissors. I can glue the visor in place with some 5-minute epoxy. And it's a dark green number 5 visor, but it looks black from the outside when it's put into a helmet. And then I can super glue the rangefinder where it goes. Most of the materials I use for this project I picked up locally. I put a list in the description. I finished my Bo-Katan helmet. I'm really very happy with this, and surprisingly, this is only my second Mandalorian helmet I've ever made. I've got this one, and I made the Heavy Gunner from the first season. He's up there on the shelf. You might be able to see him. He's kind of buried in the dark. And we're not going to talk about that. We don't want, she doesn't know that's there, okay? We'll just keep that a secret. But this is only the second Mandalorian helmet I've ever made. It's not going to be my last, I'm sure, but it was really interesting to build this particular helmet because it's clean. And what do I mean by that? Because it's covered with battle damage and scars, right? It's clean because there's no extra detail. There's no brow line that can cover up the seam between the face and the dome. There's no crest that can cover up the main seam that's on the top of the dome or any additional little panels that go on. It's just from the back of the head all the way to the chin is totally smooth and supposed to look like one big continuous piece. And building that from multiple pieces of foam is pretty challenging. I think I did okay, and I'm really very happy with how the facial paintings worked out, how the owl looks. I'm pretty happy about that. What's really kind of cool about the Mandalorian helmets is that they're all very personalized, right? For each of them, there's models. There's a style of helmet that seems consistent, but then each helmet is personalized because there's lots of different ways to have a Mandalorian helmet, and I can actually go experience that myself. Because my friend William Shakespeare over on William Shakespeare Props channel, he made this same helmet this same week. And now that I'm done with mine, I can go watch his. And that's gonna be a lot of fun because I know there's gonna be lots of different ways that you can make Bo-Katan's helmet. But this is how Odin makes. Yep, successfully made it. Too small for my head. I want to thank Will Connors, Rick Skinner, and all of my Patreon supporters. My Patreon support is the #1 thing that makes this show possible. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe. Have an idea for something for me to make? Please leave a comment below. And if you make any of these projects, you can send me a picture.